Hey, what up? This is Joe and Adam, and here we're to talk to you about the Plan Inclusive Counterplan, which is, I think, one of the most devastating tools in the negative arsenal when you're reading it correctly. So, a Plan Inclusive Counterplan is a counterplan which does all of the affirmative absent some action. So, you can think about PICs in a number of different ways. Very often, when people think about them, it's when the affirmative or the topic asks for the AF to pass an entire piece of legislation, right? So in any big bill or something like that, there's usually something in there that is sub-desirable for any number of reasons. But it doesn't have to only be a piece of legislation, especially because passing a whole bill are not topics that we really see as much anymore. So you might think about PICs that could pop up in other kinds of topics. For example, maybe there is a topic that says the USFG or whoever should increase sanctions on X country, right? Maybe you could say that economic sanctions cover a variety of things, but they shouldn't cover something like an ability for a country to buy medical technology, right? So sanction everything except food aid, sanction everything except medical tech, whatever. So you just need to be creative and think about if the affirmative has to link to a broad array of disads, how could a counterplan that does all of the AF except for the thing that generates a link to a disad be read, right? A couple of things that you want to think about with a PIC. Remember that with a PIC, you're doing the entirety of the AF, right? So you want to try to not necessarily pick out of something that links to the AF's offense. And this often means that it's very strategic to keep your PIC small, right? The bigger your PIC is, the easier it is for you to lose the strategic utility of it. So the smaller that you can stay, the better that you are. Like a hilarious version that Joe has and I have joked about over the years is like PIC out of dialysis machines. Like just say we should collapse everything except for funding for, things that help people with particular body issues like stay safe, right? So that's just because there's no disads to giving people dialysis machines, right? There just isn't. It's just a universally good thing to do. This just makes it harder for the team to generate answers to it.
Right. And so when you're thinking about that sort of a deal, right, something that can be very easy is think about what is the link to our disad we would want to read anyway. How would we solve the AF without linking to the disad, which you would think about in any counterplan. So if it's a sanction topic and, a country relies on a bunch of food aid, so your disad would be taking away their food aid is really bad, then obviously picking out a food aid avoids the link to that disad. Additionally, when you think about these sort of small plan writing like Adam is talking about, you really do want the PIC to be literally or at least as close as identical to the original plan text as possible, because any derivation from the original plan text that is present in your counterplan and attempting to generate an exception or to pick out of something or however you want to sort of say it, anything that's different in language or wording or whatever is a chance for the MG to say, well, this wouldn't solve the same way, and that solvency deficit to the affirmative becomes offense against your counterplan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What you're trying to do with the PIC is make it literally exactly the AF, except this one little niche that you know a lot about that your opponents don't.
Yeah, and this could be we'll talk very briefly. For a while, honestly, 10 years ago in Parli, there was a rise of textual competition versus functional competition, which is not a debate that you really see anymore. Textual competition just basically says that the counterplan cannot include the entirety of the affirmative plan text. So oftentimes, and that's usually an argument that's just trying to say PIC's bad without saying PIC's bad, right? And that an example of a counterplan that would not be textually competitive would be the entirety of the plan text and then adding the words except for. So there are arguments, which we won't get into here, about why textual competition is good or bad. I think you just say PIC's bad if you want to say text comp is good, but regardless. But a PIC is always functionally competitive, right? And that just means that you cannot perm a PIC, right? You can't do all of something and then do all of something except for something at the same time. That does not make any sense. They are functionally two different actions. So neither here nor there largely, but there is like a theoretical basis to kind of get into the picks debate. Oftentimes, so keep your net benefit to a pick small is often good advice. Have it be an impact that you can, use to outweigh. Oftentimes the strategic utility of the pick is that there's no solvency deficit, right? It should solve the AF. It's the AF, right? It's just the AF minus one small thing. So unlike other pieces of off-case offense, like you don't need to have the biggest impact in the world. You just want an impact that you can still weigh a risk of and do some useful things with it. The only other thing that I think is important to think about is that if a team lets you read a pick and they don't say pick's bad, the neg is usually going to win that debate, right? Especially if it's like unconditional. It's just a devastating tool in the AF strat and the neg strat. It's one of those things that you should always, like just one of your checklists and prep time should be, have we thought of a way to read a pick in this debate? If we've thought of any way to do it, you should do it, right? It's incredibly useful. So because it is so devastating of an argument, a vast majority of the time, AFs that know what's going on are reading pick's bad theory, right? And there's some compelling arguments for that.
And also because, as Adam said, it's very difficult to impact turn the net benefit. If you're saying increase taxes on all medical devices except dialysis machines, let them be really cheap for people, unless someone's going to say dialysis machines are bad, they should be more expensive, right? You're probably going to win the offense on that question.
100%. So pick's bad theory is actually probably pretty good, though, right, in terms of MG theory, as far as MG theory goes, right? So oftentimes the interpretation on pick's bad will say, when the affirmative must defend an entire whatever piece of legislation, an entire framework of sanctions, whatever it is, the opposition should not read a plan-inclusive counterplan. You'll read a violation that says that they do that, and then your standards can largely follow how other theory standards go. The most important one is almost certainly predictability, right? If the AF has to defend an entire version of something and the negative can pick one tiny thing, then it makes it really hard to be AF, right? And you can also think about, like, if you start going down the rabbit hole a little bit and think about all the potential picks one could read, there's obviously some like really stupid ones, right? Like pick out of, I don't know, somebody wearing a particular article of clothing when the plan is announced in Congress, right? Like you can get exceptionally ridiculous with these kinds of things.
And especially in Parli, right? Real legislation, real bills are frequently like hundreds or thousands of pages long. So it's very hard to verify if this like small little esoteric thing actually is or isn't part of the AF or why it would be, you know what I mean? Which can make judges feel very skeptical about awarding a whole neg ballot because they say on page 75 there's a clause that says X. You know, that's hard in a non-carded debate to put all of your eggs in that strategic basket.
Exactly. And, following Joe's point, like sometimes, there are topics very increasingly rarely for this very reason where there are multiple versions of a piece of legislation, right? Like they might be asking you to pass a Senate version, but there's actually a House version. Maybe there's a reconciliation bill that's like the middle ground between the two. And the pick might be true of one of those, but not the other. So it's just messy, right? And this is where the AF can start to generate like a bunch of offense that says that it is impossible to predict all of the different kinds of plan-inclusive counterplans that one should have to be responsible for. Oftentimes, the better the pick, the more difficult it is to predict, right? And it's hard to draw a line in the sand about this kind of pick is really goofy and small and totally unpredictable, and this kind of pick is totally good and predictable and totally in line with topic literature. Oftentimes the strategic utility of the pick is that it's not predictable, right? It is small. It does something that is very tiny. So predictability offense for the AF makes a whole lot of sense when you're reading picks bad. Other things is that there's infinitely regressive, kind of following Joe's point. If there's any number of 1,000 different things that you could talk about, the role of the neg shifts away from substantive topic engagement and instead just becomes finding like little minutia to debate about. If a pick trades off with a conversation on the topic itself, then maybe you've got like an education argument that you can be making there as well. You have arguments that say that this could kill Clash, that it's shallow offense, these kinds of things, right? The last thing that I think a good picks bad shell will also theoretically say is that if picks are bad, that doesn't mean that they don't get the link to the disad, right? Like a pick can be bad, can go away, and you still get the tax dialysis machines disad. So there's no reason why you should also get the plan inclusive counterplan to solve the entirety of the AF. If you have a substantive strat, you should be able to win it absent the counterplan. And all of these arguments can kind of be super useful. I think that it's probably true that judges feel a lot less bad voting on picks bad MG theory than they do a lot of other MG theory, which is a little bit more tenuous, right?
Also, oftentimes picks are so small that if you lose the counterplan, your disad's not going to outweigh the AF. So there's, a robust discussion to be had about that as well.
For sure. When you're answering picks bad theory, it's all about justifying neg engagement in general. Like, say that it's good to hypotest the AF. You want to try to justify your particular pick, right? You don't have to defend all picks. You have to defend your particular pick. So narrow down the offense with your counter interpretation. Have a good reason why your pick is particularly useful. Do you have any other things that people could say to answer
for picks good?
bad?
Depending if for some reason you had a knowledge of the topic beforehand, if it's topic area tournament, that might change if things are predictable, not predictable, or the research burden of things. If it's good to encourage the AF to write really responsible plans, if the MG should have to defend all the implications of the affirmative, even this small, tiny sort of thing, that is all potentially picks good offense in this instance. Yeah.
Totally. Go ahead.
I was going to say, one other thing is just we kind of glossed over this sort of earlier, but one other small element of picks is that be very wary of when a team is reading what they think is a pick, but would really do the AF and then do some other stuff to create an exemption or to create some sort of deal, right? So if the AF was to we should have a good example. If the AF was to decrease the use of some, insert a term of art here, and the neg was like, decrease the use of that thing except when that thing is treated differently or something, right? If that term of art defines the entirety of the technology, the counterplan really says the DoD should change their definition of these technologies and allow us to only reduce the use of one or something and not the other. And even though that sounds like do the AF except this, because of the sort of way that actors would classify or policy would treat or people would respond to, what those words mean, sometimes picks are permeable.
100%. And the other thing is that if you're AF answering a pick, sometimes you'll have to defend a treaty or something like that, like a treaty on law of the seas or something goofy like that, right? There's also arguments that are like, if you pick out of something, you're now not signing the same treaty that other countries have signed on to. So you're not affirming the AF at all, right? The AF has to go get renegotiated and re-signed by all the countries that signed on to it. Yeah, please.
For example, if the topic was that the United States should ratify the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, which is a United Nations treaty about how we test nuclear weapons and stuff, and the counterplan was ratify the CTBT except this part of the CTBT treaty, that's not a document that exists. This magic document that's 90% of the CTBT that nobody else has signed on to, what would that do? That would not enact the treaty except for 10% of the treaty, right? If the AF is sign X contract, the neg can't pick out of that without creating a different contract, and that is probably permeable. And, there's other things, like maybe countries that were signatories before now get a renegotiation phase, and any kind of stuff like that means that maybe they don't solve the AF at all anymore, right? So be thinking about that kind of framework. The treaty is the easy example, but there might be other ways that works out, like with a sanctions package or with any number of other things that you can really start to say, no, the pick changes the political calculus of the AF. Now the AF is a disad. Here's reasons why. People are going to want to vote on that more than theory anyway. They'll vote on theory, but picks don't solve the AF is also pretty money. And depending on what they pick out of, find ways to try to read offense to that. We're talking about very classic picks now, but if they pick out of the immediacy of the AF and they delay, then reasons the AF needs to happen now, so all offense to the counterplan. If they pick out of the immediacy and durability of the plan by consulting or putting conditions on the plan, then that's all a risk that a country says no to the consultation or fails to meet the conditions, which would at very least delay, if not prevent, the affirmative from coming into effect. These are all good MG answers.
Cool. All right. Well, we hope that this was a useful overview of plan inclusive counterplans. We think you should read them. They're really, really good. So good luck out there. Bye.